December 16, 1944. Early morning, Mona, Germany. The frozen ground quaked as another barrage of American artillery howled overhead. But this morning was different, alarmingly, bewilderingly different. The shells weren't hitting the earth or the trees. Instead, they exploded in midair, directly above advancing German troops, unleashing a deadly rain of steel, fragments against which no trench or foxhole offered protection. Within the 326th Volksgrenadier Division pressing the attack on the 38th Cavalry Squadron, battle-hardened veterans of the Eastern Front confronted something beyond their experience. These weren't the familiar patterns of artillery fire, the predictable impacts, the safe spots, the security of deep cover. This was destruction from above, calculated with scientific precision. At that moment, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group had made one of the most consequential, unauthorized calls of the entire Battle of the Bulge. Acting against explicit orders, without higher approval, he instructed his gunners to fire shells equipped with the Allies' most tightly guarded secret, the proximity-fuzed, containing miniature radar, units that detected distance and detonated at the optimal height. These fuses magnified artillery lethality by as much as 50-fold. The mathematics of killing had just been rewritten in the snowbound Ardennes. What the Germans could not have known was that they were facing a weapon so revolutionary it would change not only this battle, but the future of warfare itself. The storm breaks. Operation Wacht am Rhein had begun with high expectations for the Wehrmacht. Hitler's last gamble committed 200,000 men, 1,000 tanks and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces, all concealed under the fog and forests of the Ardennes. The Führer promised his generals that this offensive would split Allied forces, seize Antwerp, and turn the tide of a war slipping toward inevitable defeat. The initial bombardment at 5:30 on December 16th achieved total surprise. German artillery roared at 1,600 shells per minute along an 85-mile front. American intelligence had failed catastrophically. They had missed the buildup, and many frontline units were either green, replacements, or exhausted formations sent to this quiet sector for rest. But at Monschau, Colonel Axelson faced a hopeless tactical problem. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance force, was being overrun by superior numbers. Conventional artillery couldn't stop the assault. In desperation, Axelson made his fateful decision: deploy the secret proximity-fuzed shells. He would later risk court-martial for disobeying orders. But in that instant, he saw that strict obedience meant certain collapse. The result was immediate and devastating. German troops advancing in tight formations suddenly came under a type of fire they had never encountered. Shells burst 30 to 50 feet above their heads, each explosion scattering lethal fragments over a wide area. Veterans who knew how to survive ground bursts, hugging earth, hiding in ditches, sheltering behind trees, were shredded even in their cover. The science of destruction. The proximity fuse represented the apex of American scientific ingenuity, combined with industrial might. Unlike traditional shells, which required direct impact or unreliable timed fuses, these contained self-contained radar systems no larger than a coffee can. Each fuse packed in 130 electronic components, including 4 or 5 miniaturized vacuum tubes depending on the model. These had to endure the staggering force of 20,000 times gravity when fired. The technology was ingenious. At the instant of firing, a glass capsule shattered, releasing an electrolyte that created a temporary battery powering the tiny radar. For the shell's flight, the project was spearheaded by Dr. Merle Tuve at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, pursued with an intensity rivaling the Manhattan Project. The lab, disguised as a used car dealership in Silver Spring, Maryland, employed at its height nearly 3% of all U.S. physicists. Security was airtight. Workers couldn't even explain their jobs to their families, and every fuse bore a unique serial number for tracking. The technical hurdles seemed impossible. Radio vacuum tubes built for living rooms had to be redesigned to withstand the blast of a cannon, spin at extreme speeds, function in all climates, and detect targets with precision. The breakthrough came through radical miniaturization, paving the way for advances that would reshape electronics after the war. Dr. James Van Allen developed pencil eraser-sized vacuum tubes that carried out the same functions as larger models. By December 1944, U.S. factories were producing 40,000 proximity fuses daily. More than 100 companies contributed, RCA, General Electric, Sylvania, Crosley among them. The program cost exceeded $1 billion in wartime dollars, second only to the Manhattan Project itself. Authorization crisis and expansion. Axelson's unauthorized use on December 16th sparked immediate alarm within command circles. Orders had limited the fuses strictly to anti-aircraft use, to prevent any chance of capture and reverse engineering by Germany. But the astonishing effectiveness at Monschau was undeniable. The German attack was halted outright, with casualties that stunned both sides. Reports of the weapon's impact reached Supreme Headquarters swiftly. By December 19th, by December 21st, all restrictions were lifted and proximity fuses were authorized for full ground combat use across the entire Battle of the Bulge. The rapid distribution that followed showcased American logistical superiority. Within a matter of days, proximity-fused shells were reaching artillery units throughout the Ardennes. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion at Bastogne received their allocation. Just as the German encirclement tightened around the town, the 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers, began using them to secure the northwestern approaches. The 969th Field Artillery Battalion, an African-American unit commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Hubert D. Barnes, employed them with devastating success southwest of Bastogne. Each unit came to the same realization. Proximity fuses had transformed artillery from a mere supporting arm into a decisive battlefield weapon. Forward observers no longer needed to painstakingly adjust fire. The fuse itself determined the ideal detonation point. Accuracy requirements diminished, while lethality increased dramatically. Bastogne, surrounded yet superior, the siege offered the perfect demonstration of proximity. Fuses in defensive warfare. The 101st Airborne Division, encircled and heavily outnumbered, nevertheless held the vital crossroads against relentless German assaults. Their artillery support included the 406th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 75mm pack howitzers capable of firing proximity-fused rounds. Between December 19th and 31st, the 463rd fired precisely 7,086 shells, according to official records. While not all were proximity-fused due to limited supply, those that were produced devastating physical and psychological results. German formations simply dissolved under airburst barrages, with entire platoons wiped out in seconds. The December 22nd assault, which came after General McAuliffe's legendary nuts reply to the German surrender demand, highlighted the weapon's effectiveness. German infantry, advancing across snow-covered fields in standard formations, were caught in the open. Proximity-fused shells exploded overhead with pinpoint timing, creating overlapping zones of destruction that left no safe refuge. The all-African-American 969th Field Artillery Battalion played an equally crucial role. Their 155mm howitzers established a ring of death around Bastogne's perimeter, which German forces could not penetrate. The larger shells, detonating at 50 feet, devastated entire sectors with lethal fragments. German prisoners later admitted that attacking units often broke apart before reaching American lines, fleeing from the incomprehensible power of the airbursts. The Sauer River slaughter, perhaps the best documented demonstration of proximity. Fuse lethality took place near Ettelbruck along the Sauer River, December 25-26. General George S. Patton, whose Third Army was pushing north to relieve Bastogne, personally witnessed the engagement and described it in his memoir. War as I knew it. A German battalion attempted to cross the partially frozen river, believing the darkness and fog concealed them from American spotters. Normally, traditional artillery would have required careful adjustments, giving the Germans time to cross or take cover, but proximity fuses needed no such corrections. Patton wrote, "We caught a German battalion crossing the Sauer. The new position ammunition was devastating. The shells burst in the air above them. They had nowhere to run. The river behind them, our fire in front and above. When the firing stopped, we counted 702 bodies. This figure, 702 killed, verified by actual count, remains one of the few precisely documented casualty numbers from proximity fuse employment. The efficiency was chilling. A single battalion annihilated in minutes, without escape or defense. The psychological shock quickly spread across German units in the sector, with soldiers refusing orders to conduct further river crossings. Forest warfare transformed the Ardennes' dense woods, long considered ideal for concealment, became lethal traps once proximity fuses entered the fight. In open terrain, an airburst at 30-50 feet was deadly enough, but in forests, the effects multiplied many times over. Shells bursting above treetops shattered branches, creating thousands of high-velocity wooden splinters. Some splinters, as long as a man's arm, flew at hundreds of feet per second, causing horrific casualties. Traditional defensive practices, hiding behind trees, digging foxholes among roots, and became useless. The fragments and splinters rained down from above, nullifying centuries of tactical wisdom in woodland combat. American artillerymen quickly recognized this advantage. A single proximity-fused 155mm round bursting above the canopy could clear an area the size of a tennis court of every living thing. The combination of metal fragments and wooden shrapnel produced a full 360-degree kill zone. German units trained for forest warfare found their expertise meaningless. Spreading out to minimize losses left them vulnerable to wide-area effects. Grouping together for support exposed entire squads to destruction from one shell. No tactic provided safety. Technical supremacy in action to soldiers of the 1940. Each fuse housed a tiny radio transmitter tuned to roughly 220 MHz, continuously emitting waves that bounced off nearby objects, ground, trees, vehicles, even human bodies. As a shell closed on its target, the reflected signal grew stronger. Once it reached a preset intensity that corresponded to the desired burst height, an electronic switch tripped and the round detonated. The whole mechanism had to survive conditions that would destroy ordinary electronics. During firing, the round experienced accelerations up to 20,000 times. Gravity, forces that would pulverize a human body. The projectiles also spun at tremendous rates, producing enormous centrifugal loads, and they faced temperature extremes from roughly 3,000 degrees in the gun barrel to sub-zero at the apex of their trajectories. Yet the delicate vacuum tubes, cushioned by ingenious shock absorption systems, endured and operated with better than 80% reliability. Extensive testing at the Aberdeen, proving ground established the ideal burst heights for different calibers. For the standard divisional 105mm howitzer, about 30 FT proved optimal. The 155mm pieces were most lethal at roughly 50 FT. The rarer 240mm rounds produced catastrophic effects at 70+ FT, capable of clearing whole grid squares of enemy troops. That technological edge translated directly into battlefield dominance. Studies indicated proximity fuses raised lethality 5 to 10-fold compared with conventional shells, while the lethal fragment area expanded by a factor of 50. Anti-aircraft performance rose sharply as well, and within weeks of deployment, the success rate against V-1 flying bombs jumped from about 17% to roughly 79%. German intelligence failures and confusion compounded the effect. In December 1944, German forces overran an American ammunition depot and captured roughly 20,000 proximity-fused rounds. Rather than spur rapid countermeasure development, German technicians misread their findings and declared the devices impossible. The presence of vacuum tubes inside artillery shells conflicted with prevailing German assumptions about electronics and ballistics. Some concluded the visible components were decoys or that the Americans employed magnetic detection. Institutional blind spots played a role. Ironically, Germany had once been at the forefront of proximity fuse research. Rheinmetall Borsig and AEG in Berlin had prototypes by 1940, but Hitler's order, canceling any weapons, program needing more than 6 months to reach production, halted their work. German engineers found it hard to believe the Americans had solved problems they themselves had abandoned. The paradox deepens considering German capabilities. Electrostatic proximity fuses, using capacitance changes, showed about 95% reliability in tests rather than radar. Had development continued, Germany might have fielded such fuses by Tver and Hermann. Göring later acknowledged in interrogation. The German fuses were 3 or 4 months from production when the war ended. Christmas brought no respite. On December 25, 1944, German units attempting to use the holiday for resupply or reorganization, discovered that proximity fuses observed no ceasefires. Field kitchens, supply convoys, and assembly areas suffered devastating bombardment that required no forward spotting. The 420th Armored Field Artillery Battalion alone fired over 1,000 rounds on Christmas Day, most fitted with proximity fuses. Their M7 Priest self-propelled howitzers delivered rapid, accurate fire that caught German formations off guard. The ability to engage effectively without observation in bad weather or at night converted artillery from a daytime weapon into a round-the-clock threat. The psychological blow was severe. German troops who had learned to move under poor flying conditions, when Allied aircraft could not patrol and observers could not see, found no sanctuary. Death could arrive at any time in any weather. With nothing more than the distant whistle of incoming shells as warning, elite formations also suffered. On December 21st, SS Colonel Otto Scorzani's hand-picked commandos attempted to seize Malmedy. These weren't ordinary troops. They had rescued Mussolini, nearly captured Tito, and specialized in deception and even infiltrating lines in U.S. uniforms. They met proximity-fused artillery that turned their disguises from an advantage into a fatal liability. Shells exploded overhead with unnerving precision, as if detecting the impostors beneath. While precise casualty totals remained debated, the assault collapsed disastrously with heavy losses, effectively ending Scorzani's offensive actions. The psychological impact on these elite SS troops was particularly telling. Even highly indoctrinated, rigorously trained soldiers were driven to collapse. Some survivors reportedly charged the American lines, seeking instant death rather than endure. Continued bombardment, a complete breakdown of discipline among some of the regime's most fanatical fighters. Finally, the production achievement behind proximity fuses matched any wartime industrial feat. By December 1944, more than 100 American firms had been converted to fuse manufacture. The Crosley Corporation abandoned refrigerator production in favor of fuse assembly. Emerson Radio shifted from home electronics to weapons manufacturing. Sylvania, RCA, and General Electric committed entire facilities to the program. Quality control reached heights unseen in previous mass production efforts. Each of the 130 parts received individual testing. Every solder joint was examined under magnification, and random samples were actually fired to confirm survival under combat conditions. The rejection standards were uncompromising. Any component showing the slightest deviation was scrapped. The workforce, largely women, maintained this exacting standard while working 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. For security reasons, they did not know the full nature of their work. They only understood that what they made was vital to the war effort. By December 1944, production was turning out one proximity fuse every 2 seconds, around the clock. The drop in unit cost was astonishing. In 1942, a single fuse had cost 732 euros more than a typical worker's annual pay. But by December 1944, mass production had pushed the price down to 18 per unit without sacrificing quality. That efficiency made possible 22 million fuses produced during the war, with 200,000 deployed during the Battle of the Bulge alone. Patton's arithmetic. General Patton grasped the value of proximity fuses perhaps better than any commander. His Third Army, driving to relieve Bastogne, used them as a breakthrough weapon. His artillery chief, Brigadier General Edward Williams, developed tactics specifically for proximity fuse employment. Williams pioneered concentrated time on target barrages where multiple battalions fired so shells arrived together. When dozens of proximity fused rounds detonated simultaneously at their optimal heights, the result was apocalyptic. German soldiers called it the bell toll of death. Between December 22nd and 29th, Patton's Third Army fired 50,000 proximity fuse shells. The effect was decisive in shattering German resistance and opening the corridor to Bastogne. Elsenborn Ridge demonstrated proximity fuses at maximum effect. There, the 2nd and 99th Infantry divisions held critical ground against the 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite 1st SS Panzer Division Liebstandarte Adolf Hitler. Over 3 days, December 17th and 19th, American artillery fired 160,000 rounds, about 40,000 of them proximity fused. Those 25% of shells accounted for an estimated 60% of the more than 5,000 German casualties. The numbers were stark. Proximity fuses multiplied. American firepower roughly fourfold. German assaults up steep forested slopes ran into walls of airburst steel. Entire companies vanished in seconds, and bodies piled so densely that follow-on waves had to clamber over the dead. After 3 days, the attacks stopped. The elite of the Waffen-SS had been broken by American technology. Operation Bodenplatter's destruction. On January 1, 1945, the Luftwaffe launched Operation Bodenplatter, some 900 fighters attacking Allied airfields. The raid achieved surprise and caught many Allied planes on the ground. But returning, German pilots encountered walls of proximity-fused anti-aircraft fire. Of 277 German aircraft lost that day, 172 fell to anti-aircraft guns, most using proximity fuses. The kill rate stunned both sides. Pilots trained to evade predictive anti-aircraft patterns found shells, detonating exactly where they would do maximum damage. The Luftwaffe, already severely weakened, never recovered from those losses. Breaking the secret. By early January 1945, secrecy became untenable. Too many shells had been fired and too many soldiers had witnessed their effects. On January 6, the War Department authorized limited disclosure. The New York Times reported on a new type of artillery shell that multiplied the effectiveness of American guns without describing the technology. German intelligence finally recognized the weapon's significance. Too late. A January 10th report from Foreign Armies West stated, "The Americans possess a radio-controlled artillery fuse that detonates shells at optimal height for anti-personnel effect. This weapon has caused severe casualties among our forces in the RANs. No effective countermeasures exist." Strategic Impact Assessment. Post-war analysis confirmed the proximity fuse's decisive influence. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt stated, "The proximity fuse was decisive. Our attacks broke down not because of American courage, though they fought well, but because of artillery that seemed to have eyes." General Hasso Montoyel, 5th Panzer Army commander, testified, "The American artillery was the terror of our soldiers, especially the new shells that exploded in the air. They caused panic even among veteran troops, and the statistics underscored the claim. Some 200,000 proximity-fused shells were fired, producing an estimated 15,000, 20,000 German casualties, as much as 20% of total German losses. The weapon proved 5 to 10 times more effective than conventional ammunition while requiring no forward observation in poor weather. The human cost. Behind every statistic lay human tragedy. Many German soldiers, including teenagers conscripted in the final months, died in ways unfamiliar to traditional warfare, killed by munitions that seemed to find them wherever they hid. American factory workers bore their own burden. Accidents were hushed for security, and employees at Crosley Corporation, Emerson Radio, and other plants suffered breakdowns from stress and exhaustion. They manufactured unparalleled weapons without knowing what they produced, carrying that burden in enforced silence. Still, the moral calculus of war remains complex. The Battle of the Bulge claimed 19,000 American lives. Without proximity fuses, how many additional lives would have been lost? How much longer might the war have dragged on? How many more victims of the Holocaust would have perished while fighting continued? Every day the conflict was shortened potentially, saved thousands awaiting liberation in concentration camps. Technological legacy. The proximity fuse program spawned advances that reshaped post-war technology. The miniaturized vacuum tubes became building blocks for modern electronics. The exacting quality control methods developed for fuse production set new industry standards. Organizational techniques used to coordinate hundreds of suppliers anticipated modern supply chain management. Dr. James Van Allen applied his miniaturization work to satellite instruments and later discovered Earth's radiation belts. Radar principles matured into later systems, and the idea of autonomous sensors deciding when to detonate evolved into guided missiles and ultimately the family of smart weapons in use today. Every precision-guided munition has its lineage in the proximity fuse, the first weapon that could sense its environment and choose the moment to explode. The revolution that began in the Ardennes continues on contemporary battlefields where smart weapons dominate. Final reckoning. The Battle of the Bulge ended on January 25, 1945. with German forces in full retreat. Hitler's last major offensive cost Germany roughly 100,000 casualties while achieving nothing decisive. American losses totaled about 75,000, including 19,000 killed. The proximity fuse proved itself not merely an incremental improvement but a war-winning technology. General Eisenhower's assessment that German possession of proximity fuses might have made D-Day exceedingly difficult, perhaps impossible, underscores their strategic weight. They were not just a better shell, they altered the arithmetic of warfare. German soldiers, confronting proximity-fused artillery, experienced something unprecedented. Death delivered by rounds that seemed to possess intelligence, that could locate them wherever they hid, turning the very air into a killing field. Their ordeal marked warfare's decisive step into the technological age. From Colonel Axelson's unauthorized first use on December 16, 1944 through the systematic employment of roughly 200,000 shells across the Ardennes, proximity fuses showed that scientific innovation could yield decisive military advantage. The marriage of American industrial capacity, scientific inventiveness, and tactical adaptation produced a weapon that helped shape the war's outcome. Ultimately, the proximity fuse story is one of transformation, technological, tactical, and human. It demonstrated that industrial democracies could generate weapons of staggering effectiveness, that innovation could offset numerical shortcomings, and that superiority in science often determines victory. Those lessons influenced not only the closing months of World War II, but the entire structure of warfare that followed. In the frozen woods of the Ardennes, the age of technological warfare had truly arrived. The mathematics of death were rewritten by tiny radar sets inside artillery shells, forever changing how humans wage war. The German soldiers who died beneath proximity-fused airbursts became casualties not only of a single battle but of a revolution in military affairs that continues to shape our world today.